The Treaty of Tordesillas, signed in 1494, was a monumental agreement between Spain and Portugal that aimed to divide newly discovered lands outside Europe between the two powers. Brokered by Pope Alexander VI, the treaty established a line of demarcation in the Atlantic Ocean, granting Spain rights to territories west of the line and Portugal to those east of it. This accord not only resolved immediate territorial disputes between the two nations, but also profoundly shaped the course of world history, influencing global exploration, colonial expansion, trade, and cultural exchange. The late 15th century was a turning point in world history, as European powers embarked on a quest to explore and claim new lands. Spain and Portugal were at the forefront of this age of exploration, driven by a desire to find alternative trade routes to Asia and secure access to valuable resources. Christopher Columbus's arrival in the Americas in 1492, under Spanish patronage, heightened tensions between the two nations as they competed for control over newly discovered territories. Portugal, which had invested heavily in maritime exploration along the African coast and in the Indian Ocean, saw Spain's claims as a threat to its ambitions. To mediate this growing rivalry, Pope Alexander VI issued a series of decrees in 1493, allocating territories west of a line drawn 100 leagues west of the Azores and Cape Verde Islands to Spain. Dissatisfied with this arrangement, Portugal negotiated directly with Spain, leading to the Treaty of Tordesillas in 1494. The treaty adjusted the line of demarcation to 370 leagues west of the Cape Verde Islands, giving Portugal greater influence in the Eastern Hemisphere. The Treaty of Tordesillas established a division of the non-European world between Spain and Portugal. This agreement effectively allowed Spain to dominate most of the Americas, while Portugal gained control over lands in Africa, Asia, and, crucially, Brazil, an unintentional outcome of the treaty's geographic provisions. By establishing clear spheres of influence, the treaty enabled both powers to pursue colonial ambitions without direct confrontation. However, this division ignored the claims and sovereignty of other European powers, as well as the rights of indigenous populations, who were excluded from the negotiations entirely. In the short term, the treaty facilitated the creation of two distinct colonial empires. Spain focused on exploring and colonizing the Americas, leading to the conquest of vast territories and the establishment of a resource-driven economy, fueled by gold and silver from the New World. Portugal, on the other hand, concentrated on its eastern territories, establishing a network of trading posts in Africa and Asia, and claiming Brazil in South America after its accidental discovery by Pedro Alvarez Cabral in 1500. This arrangement allowed Portugal to dominate Indian Ocean trade routes and secure a monopoly on valuable commodities such as spices and silks. The treaty also legitimized the exploitation of indigenous populations by both Spain and Portugal. In Spanish territories, systems such as the encomienda granted settlers the right to extract labor and resources from native peoples, often under brutal conditions. In Portuguese Brazil, the establishment of sugar plantations relied heavily on enslaved African labor, initiating patterns of forced migration and cultural exchange that would shape the region for centuries. The Treaty of Tordesillas had far-reaching consequences that extended well beyond the 16th century. It marked the beginning of European imperial dominance and set the stage for the global age of imperialism. By formalizing the division of the world into spheres of influence, the treaty established a precedent for later colonial agreements and reinforced the Eurocentric belief that European powers had the right to claim and govern non-European lands. This mindset would drive subsequent colonial ventures, including the partition of Africa in the 19th century. One of the most significant outcomes of the treaty was the cultural and economic exchange it facilitated between Europe and the rest of the world. The Columbian Exchange, which began with Spanish and Portuguese exploration, introduced American crops such as maize, potatoes, and tomatoes to Europe and Africa, revolutionizing global agriculture and diets. Similarly, European crops, livestock, and technologies were introduced to the Americas, transforming indigenous ways of life. In Portuguese Brazil, the blending of European, African, and indigenous cultures created a unique cultural identity that endures to this day. The spread of Christianity, particularly Catholicism, was another enduring legacy of Spanish and Portuguese colonization, as missionaries sought to convert indigenous peoples and integrate them into colonial societies. However, the treaty's long-term impact also included significant challenges to the dominance of Spain and Portugal. By the late 16th century, other European powers such as England, France and the Netherlands began to challenge Iberian hegemony, rejecting the treaty's legitimacy and establishing their own colonies in regions not explicitly covered by its provisions. The rise of the Dutch East India Company and similar enterprises further undermined Portuguese control of Asian trade, while English and French settlers expanded into North America and the Caribbean, encroaching on Spanish territories. The treaty's failure to account for the ambitions of other European nations ultimately contributed to the decline of Spanish and Portuguese dominance in global affairs. The geographic implications of the treaty also played a role in shaping modern political boundaries. In South America, for example, the division established by the Treaty of Tordesillas influenced the territorial extent of Portuguese Brazil, which grew into a vast and distinct region within the continent. Later agreements, such as the Treaty of Zaragoza in 1529, further refined the division of the world, particularly in the Pacific and Asia, reinforcing the treaty's influence on the global map. Despite its historical significance, the Treaty of Tordesillas was far from flawless. Its Eurocentric assumptions, which disregarded the rights and sovereignty of non-European peoples, reflect the colonial mindset of the time. By framing the world as a resource to be divided and exploited by European powers, the treaty perpetuated systems of inequality and exploitation that would shape global relations for centuries. Furthermore, the geographic limitations of the treaty were significant. In an era before accurate navigational tools, determining the exact location of the demarcation line was difficult, leading to disputes over its implementation, particularly in regions such as Southeast Asia. The treaty also failed to prevent the rise of competing colonial powers. While it temporarily resolved tensions between Spain and Portugal, it ignored the ambitions of England, France, and the Netherlands, all of which rejected its legitimacy and pursued their own imperial agendas. As a result, the treaty's influence began to wane by the 17th century as new powers emerged to challenge Iberian dominance. The Treaty of Tordesillas was a defining moment in the history of exploration and colonization. By dividing the world between Spain and Portugal, it facilitated the establishment of two of the first global empires and shaped the course of global trade, cultural exchange, and political boundaries. While it succeeded in resolving immediate disputes between its signatories, the treaty's legacy is marked by its Eurocentric worldview and the systems of exploitation it legitimized. Nevertheless, the Treaty of Tordesillas laid the foundations for the interconnected world we live in today, influencing the development of global empires and the cultural and economic exchanges that continue to shape our modern world.